The volume on the Kentucky River was published in 1942, and so John Spelman probably got this in 41 of 1940, so he was 28, 29 years old. And I believe that Thomas Clark wanted John Spelman to be the illustrator of his book because he had seen another book, and that is this book right here. At Home in the Hills, Glimpses of Harlan County, Kentucky through the media of the linoleum block and the woodcut by John A. Spelman III, printed at the Pine Mountain Print Shop, Pine Mountain, Kentucky. This book was a book that John Spelman published when he was teaching art at the Pine Mountain Settlement School in far eastern Kentucky. He was there from 1937 to 1941, and he published this book in 1939, so this book would have just been published, and Thomas Clark must have seen this book, and he thought, that's the person I want to illustrate my book on the Kentucky River. At Home in the Hills was a collection of linoleum block prints that John Spelman developed and created when he was in the Pine Mountain School. He went around in the neighboring area, in the rural area around Pine Mountain, and he did a lot of sketching, and he created 40 prints that he assembled into a book of shacks and sheds and fences and that kind of thing around Pine Mountain. And it turns out that At Home in the Hills was very well received. In fact, it was, people reviewed it in newspapers in far distant places from Pine Mountain, Kentucky. And so between At Home in the Hills and its success, and then along comes a commission for John Spelman to illustrate a really prestigious book in the Rivers of America series, was quite a period in his life, and I was looking at the other illustrators for the Rivers of America series, and he was in a pretty good company. Andrew Wyeth was one of the first illustrators, and I also noticed recently that A.Y. Jackson illustrated one of the volumes, and he was one of those group of 7 members that we all know about. So I think the success of At Home in the Hills and the Kentucky River book really impelled, led John Spelman into a life that he was devoted to art, and especially to printmaking. How did we get into looking at John Spelman? People have asked us this quite often, and so this all started back in 2014. We were going through my parents' house up on Maple Hill, and we were going through my mother's books and trying to figure out what to do with them. And I came across a thin paperback called Appalachian Heritage, and it was winter 1983, so it was obviously a quarterly publication of some kind. And had a very striking print on the cover. And I opened this thing up, and I saw that it was that all the illustrations in the issue were by somebody named John Spelman. And I didn't really know John Spelman at all. I had a sense I'd heard that name somewhere, but that was about it. And all this stuff in this journal was related to Appalachia. All his illustrations, all the articles, everything in there was Appalachian. I thought, well, why in the world would my mom have this book? And so I read through the little introductory essay, and in the last paragraph, the writer said that John Spelman had died in Grand Marais, Minnesota in 1969. And so I thought, well, that must have something to do with it. Um, well, a couple days after finding this book, I was talking to our friend Keith Morris, an accomplished artist in his own right, and I asked Keith if he had ever heard the name John Spelman, and Keith said, well, yeah, he was my high school art teacher. And so we ended up talking about this for a little bit, and then it started to dawn on me where I had heard that name, John Spelman. In the early 1980s, I was on the board for the Grand Marais Playhouse, along with some people who were in Swanson was on the board, and Anne Marie, and Cheryl Conklin Briggs was on the board, and a number of other people. And we used to go around and meet monthly, and we met in the homes of different board members. And on one evening, and I'm not sure about this, but I believe it was the home of Rolf and Gail Scrine. Gail was on the board, and on the living room wall there was a print, a framed black and white print, and I was kind of interested in it, and I asked about it, and someone said, well, that was by John Spelman, and that he used to live here in Grand Marais. Well, there was somebody else at that meeting who was a member of the board, and that was Sharon Eliason. And Sharon at the time said, oh, I have a number of things by John Spelman. So when I found this copy of Appalachian Heritage, I remembered that Sharon had said that 30 years ago. And so I called her up and said, I reminded her that this had happened, and was this still true? And she said, well, yes, it is. And you're welcome to come down and have a look. So Tracey and I went down, and when Sharon and Hank had a place over on the East Bay, and to look at these things. Well, it wasn't a few things. It was hundreds of things, and I'm not exaggerating. It was really hundreds of things. There were scores and scores of prints and cards that were made from Spelman prints. There were pencil drawings, dozens of pencil drawings. There were watercolors. There was correspondence by John Spelman. There was a typescript of a novel he tried to write. There were newspaper clippings about John Spelman. There were photographs of John from all periods of his life. And there were little artifacts like the sketchbooks he carried around in his pocket. And it was amazing. And Sharon was kind enough to let us take all this stuff home and go through it. And while we were doing that, we started to think, well, wouldn't it be nice to put together a little exhibit so that other people could see this stuff? And here we are, 7 years later. It has kind of come together here at the Heritage Post. The book was kind of a second thought. Exhibits come and go. They're pretty ephemeral. They're up for a month or two and then they're gone. So we thought that producing a book that was related to the exhibit would be a way of kind of prolonging the exhibition's life, and would be a way for people to have something to take home with them, and if they wanted to, and also would be a way of sharing John Spelman's art with people who wouldn't see the exhibition. So the book and the exhibit are pretty much related to each other. What's in the exhibition is largely what's in the book and vice versa. But there are a few differences that I want to mention. One is that in the book there's an introductory essay of about 20 pages that is not in the exhibition. And in that introductory essay there are a number of images and illustrations that are not part of the exhibition. On the other hand, there are some things that are here in in the exhibit that are not included in the book. And I want to just mention a couple of them. One is here in this room, there are 3 linoleum blocks that Spelman carved. And this leads to another story. When we first started digging into John Spelman, someone mentioned to us that we should try to connect with Linda Zink because she might have some Spelman material. And so we got a hold of Linda, and it turns out that Linda and her then husband, Richard Humphrey, were very good friends of John Spelman's. And at one point, John came to Linda and he gave her a handful of his blocks. And so we were down visiting Linda at her home, talking about Spelman stuff, and she suddenly disappeared for a couple minutes, and she came back with a cardboard box. And here were these John Spelman blocks. There were, I'd say, about 10 of them. And this was actually kind of a moving experience because after you've seen prints, to actually see the block that the thing was made with, the prints were made with, I felt a real personal connection to John Spelman when I was handling those blocks that he had carved. And it's fascinating when you've seen the prints to then see the block from which the print is made. And I get the same feeling when I go into Tracey gallery studio up the hill and I look up at that ceiling. If you haven't done that, next time you're in Betsy's gallery, go look up at the ceiling between log joists and you'll see what I'm talking about. Well, okay. These blocks, we're lucky to be able to see these 3 blocks that are in here because tragically, almost all of the linoleum blocks and the woodcuts from Spelman's Minnesota years have been destroyed by fire. And so we're really fortunate that we have these 3 that we can see. One of them is illustrated in the book, and that's the block that for the print of that beautiful view down to the east down Clearwater Lake, one of the iconic views of the Boundary Waters. The other is a small little block of an Appalachian cabin. That's one of, I think, Spelman's earliest pieces, and this has been loaned to the exhibit by Don Eliason. And then there's this astonishing linoleum block of the Maple Hill Church print that has been loaned by Ruth Tice. As I say, we're lucky we get to see these things because most of his Minnesota things have been destroyed, but I'm happy to say that almost all of Spelman's Appalachia blocks have survived, and they are at the Pine Mountain Settlement School where he taught in eastern Kentucky. They have linoleum blocks, wood cuts, copper plate etchings, metal plate engravings, and I would say there might be as many as 150 of them there. One thing we have not found is a single block from the Kentucky book, and they must have been astonishing blocks because that print, that big print of the Palisades of the Kentucky River is a block that's about the size of the Maple Hill Church block. But none of these have turned up. The other thing that I want to mention is something I'm really fond of, and this, I just love John Spelman's pencil drawings. What? I love John Spelman's pencil drawings. And there are, in the book, I think we put maybe a dozen of them, but we were able to squeeze a few extras into the exhibit here so that they are not included in the book. There are, what are there, 9 on each panel back there. And then there are a few more scattered through the exhibit. The thing about the pencil drawings is they differ from the prints, because when John Spelman finished carving a block, he could create multiple copies of that image. And granted, every print is somewhat unique, even though it's a close copy, because the block has to be inked again every time you take an impression. And so there might be slight variations in the prints. But on the whole, you were able to make copies of, he could make copies, but the drawings are another matter, because these have never been reproduced. And as far as I know, almost nobody has seen these things. Maybe a few family members, but when we made our pilgrimage, Spelman pilgrimage to Kentucky back in 2016, we went to the University of Kentucky Special Collections Library to look at the Spelman material that had been given to the University of Kentucky by John's sister Barbara a year after he died. And we found out that none of the material has been cataloged or processed. They just brought 3 flat archival boxes and put them on our table in the reading room, and we just started looking through this stuff. And it was a lot of material, and we guess there might have been 100 John Spelman drawings in these boxes from his Appalachian years. And there are quite a number of drawings here in Grand Marais between Sharon's collection and Don Eliasson's groups of materials. And it was hard to make a selection of these because we've got, what, 20 of his drawings here in the show, and there probably are at least 150 or more that we had to choose from. The thing that I want to say is, when you're looking at these drawings, you're looking at the only copy there is. And I think it's important to remember that. Now, the same thing is true of the watercolors. That's one-off. You don't make multiple copies. So there's something special about the drawings for me, and I always enjoyed looking at them. One of the drawings is over here, this drawing of the Hedstrom lumber camp. And this is an amazing artifact that came up. And there are these 2 pieces of masking tape on the corners. And I'm convinced John Spelman put those there, because I think he taped this drawing down on a surface as part of trying to create outlines that he could transfer to the linoleum block. And so I know it's a little disconcerting to see those things in the corner there, but those are historic pieces of masking tape. Well, I want to mention one thing that is not in either the exhibition or in the book, and that is John at some point decided he would develop a line of Christmas cards. And they are, the prints in this room are John Spelman at the top of his game. They really are. And when you see these Christmas cards, you can hardly believe they were done by the same person. They just don't have any artistic snap to them. And so we decided to leave them out. But I mentioned them because I think he started doing this because he couldn't make any money with selling his prints. And so he decided, oh, I'll try a line of Christmas cards and see if I can make some income from selling my art. And so it sort of goes back to the idea that, well, he was not quite 30 years old. He might have been at the high point of his life making money at his art, and he never quite managed that here in Cook County. I never met John Spelman. I moved to Grand Marais about 1978. He had died in 69, so he died about 9 years before. But in talking to people who did know him, we have an idea of what he was like, some idea of what he was like. He was obviously a big guy, and he had a big voice, and he made big dramatic gestures. He was not a reserved, taciturn Scandinavian. He was an expressive person. And I think of him as a very complicated individual. I think he had many levels and aspects to his personality. And he must have been a really interesting person to be around. Well, I just want to close by saying a few thank yous. I need to, I was going to thank the Lloyd K. Johnson Foundation also, but they get thanked twice now. But it was a Lloyd K. A grant from the Lloyd K. Johnson that made it possible to put the exhibit together and to get the book printed. And we really do appreciate the support they gave us. I want to thank publicly my wife, Tracey, who has been an amazing part of this whole process for all these years about John Spelman. I'm standing up here as a testament to the idea that you can collaborate with your spouse. I would not lightly recommend it. We got very short with each other quite often during the whole process, and the waters got fairly choppy, but nothing sank the boat. And so I'm just going to say that I was going to use the word because of Tracey's obsessive tendencies, but I'm not going to use that phrase. I'm going to say because of her meticulous attention to detail, that all this stuff turned out better than it otherwise would have been. So thank you, my dear. I also want to give my own thank you and acknowledgement to Katie Clark, who is acting many things for the Historical Society right now, but Katie's energy and efforts and capabilities have been extremely valuable to us, and it's been wonderful to work with her over the last several months, and so thank you, Katie, very much. I also want to thank the people from the community who loaned pieces to the show, who've been willing to leave blank spaces on their walls of their homes so that the rest of us can enjoy these things. And you'll see their names on various labels around the room. I want to thank Don Eliason in particular, because quite a number of things were loaned by Don. Several of the prints and the linoleum block back there, but the Appalachian drawings that came from Don Eliason are a real treasure. And then finally, John Spelman had three sisters, Marguerite, who we really don't know much about, and then he had a sister named Barbara, whose married name became Barbara Allen, and she lived over in southern Michigan, and she died fairly recently. I would guess 2 years ago, maybe, or something. And I think one of our big disappointments is that we didn't get the book finished in time to give her a copy. I think she would have really enjoyed having one. And then there was another sister named Ellen, who became Ellen Eliasson. And she, for her adult life, was a member of the Grand Marais community. And these two sisters, Barbara and Ellen, must have realized and recognized early on that their brother John had an exceptional artistic talent. And so they just started saving everything. And they saved everything they could that was by him and everything they could that was about him. And most of this material from his Appalachian years was donated by his sister Barbara to the University of Kentucky. And the stuff that was accumulated by Ellen was related primarily to his Minnesota years, and she passed this down to the family, and it has ended up in the care of Sharon Eliasson. And Sharon has cared for this material and has added to it and has preserved it, and now in a great gesture of generosity has made it all available for all of us to see. And so we all owe a debt of gratitude to Sharon. Thanks so much, Sharon. So that's all I have to say. If anybody, should we take a few questions if there are any?
Well, I was gonna just have you do that, actually.
You were, well.
Even though we didn't talk about it.
Yeah. Well, if anybody has a question that they want to make public, they can do that. But of course, Tracey and I are both very willing to entertain questions informally as we look at things throughout the room. So if you want to corner one of us at any point, that's fine too.
We have one over here.
Jim.
Really dumb question, but I don't know the answer. You went to the University of Minnesota, how did you connect to Grand Marais?
How did he connect to Grand Marais? John Spelman spent his summers from the time he was a little toddler at a summer cabin up at Hoagland. And so he got to know the Hoagland Grand Marais community as a little boy, and then as he got into his teen years also. But then after University of Minnesota, he went out to Appalachia and spent a number of years out there. And then for some reason, he left Pine Mountain Settlement School. It's not entirely clear what happened there, but he moved back to Grand Marais, and he moved here in 1942, and he lived the rest of his life here. And he ended up getting a job teaching art at the Cook County High School in 1960, and he taught there for the last 10 years of his life. And that was really the legacy of the last 10 years of his life, because we haven't found many pieces of art that he produced during that last decade, but he's made a big impact on a lot of people as a teacher of art in the school. Well, okay, everybody, thanks for coming, and enjoy the show.
I just want to remind everyone that there is Java Moose coffee, cookies, lemonade, water after you've been roasting in this room. Feel free to help yourself and look around, buy a book, join a committee. Thank you again, Scott and Tracey. You did an excellent job.
Well, you see, for the whole thing.
Art seems to be one of the factors that glue the community.
It is.
Right? It draws artists and you know, especially
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Very enjoyable.
Thank you.
It never intense. It was very interesting.
I'm glad we did. Scott does a good job.
He did a great job.
I'm hot there. Chicken seal and youngest. My Did you know that?
Hello.
Hi, Marla.
What's going?
Doing well? Yourself?
Not too bad.
Are you doing double duty?
I am. Whatever. 1951.
Well, just, I would have thought I was going to leave a $2 donation.
All right. We'll take that.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. There's something in it for everyone. There you go.